this idea of what the British represent in this movie.
Yes.
And that is, I think.
Are you going into it?
Yeah. I'm just gonna.
Oh, you're just going into it? No introduction? Okay.
No
and
introduction
rant.
necessary. Go. I think I've talked to the guys about this quite a bit recently because it's something that bothers me, and it's this glorification, romanticization of what British colonialism was over the years. We know the English Empire, much like our own American Empire, to be one of the most violent and obtrusive ones across all of the globe over thousands of years, right? And when you talk about the British occupation of India, for example, one of the longest ones, in this movie, again, and Fahad just talked about it with the other film, it's like, I'm really glad that the British weren't just like removed through a cricket match or something like that. I'm glad. I'm also really glad that we didn't get too much emphasis on Jenny being some white knight savior in this story. Yes, she gives the blueprints to the place, but like she's also very clearly complicit in the kidnapping of Mali. She's like handing her goods and stuff like that. Even though there's times where like her and Beam are falling in love, I think it does represent the slight idea of not all the British were bad. I'm sure some were allies in the process, probably vast minority, but it does show that side of the story without giving her too much prominence throughout the entire film. And I think that was great, as opposed to a lot of other media we get nowadays that are just like glorifying, romanticizing, like I said, British occupation.
What media?
Bridgerton, freaking the Crown,
The Crown's well made. All right, it's not shit. Like
I'm not saying these things are poorly made. They have big fan bases, quite big fan bases. But at the end of the day,
yeah. See, like, I need to turn your volume up because you're kind of like, this ain't a rant if you're quiet about it.
No, I can be quiet. I can be subtle. I'm Beam. Okay, I'm a water kind of guy.
Water bender.
Yeah. But I think in general, we have this like recent. I mean, it's not even recent, but probably the past 100+ years, especially over here in America, we have this obsession with British royalty in general. We want to know everything about what's going on with the royal family. We want to know what's going on with the Queen, with the Prince, with Meghan Markle, like anyone, right, remotely related to the royal family. And I've always hated that growing up because I'm like, for me, it exudes some form of like self-hatred to be like, I'm looking at the people that symbolize everything wrong with society, which is this elitist, colonial, imperialistic like aspect of society that we've, thoroughly moved on from, but yet you're choosing to cling on to that. And it's like, I'm not royalty, right? And if I'm not royalty, what other purpose do I have to obsess over it other than the fact that I aspire to be like royalty, or that I aspire to be obsessed with everything to do with royalty's life as it relates to being the exact opposite of mine? And it's kind of how I feel recently in America about many people in our social class's obsession with billionaires in America, like very often like coming to bat for billionaires at every next corner. And that to me is the equivalent of the issues we see with social class when it comes to British royalty.
Yo, where's this going, dog?
Listen, this became political real quick. No. But I mean, it's just a parallel that I'm making because we don't have royalty here in America, but we have other forms of it through social class. And I think my issue with all those kind of media, like Bridgerton, etc., is that they're romanticizing what British Empire, what the British Empire was capable of and what it did all throughout history. And so I think a lot of people have been arguing lately, Bridgerton employs a lot of actors of color, right? And they're playing these traditionally English roles. And I'm like, that's great, but honestly, I don't know if it makes me feel any better that a colored person is playing the role, like playing this character who was so complicit to overall oppression and violence, even if the story's all about getting married, like drinking tea, what's the new drama in our family. It's like, I get the obsession with drama. I mean, it's not for me. I get the obsession with drama and reality TV, etc. Right. But why are we extra obsessed about it when it applies to the royal family? It's just like, I think it's the glamour of it all and the prestige. And I understand that. But it just, for me, I can't look beyond the fact that these people were just... Yeah. And again, it's not English people as a whole. It's specifically the royal family being complicit for such huge atrocities, like literal atrocities. And so when I see people of color playing those roles, it doesn't feel to me like taking back your oppression. All it feels like is, being involved in the romanticization of it all. It's like, I when I think about British royalty, I don't think about drinking tea and going to weddings and having lavish parties. I could think about that with anybody, realistically. It could be any movie, any show. But when I think about the British royalty specifically, it's more about, oppression. It's more about atrocities, etc. Especially when we're talking from the point of view of people who have been colonialized by the British themselves. If we're Indian, if we're American, whatever it is. We were recently, I think, when watching the trailer for before watching Top Gun, I saw the trailer for Mr. Malcolm's List, which is a movie coming out soon that is purely the exact essence of everything. Oh, it actually just came out already?
Yeah, we almost watched it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Yeah? Maybe you almost watched it. But,
wow.
No, I'm saying maybe you guys almost watched it. I know.
Dudes skip RRR to watch this movie. That's how we fight back. We skip this movie.
Watch it back to back.
There you go.
Back to back. Yeah.
Go. No, but that movie, it's like it doesn't even have a subplot. Like the entire trailer is all different sequences of people saying, "Oh no, he's breaking up with her," or "Oh no, they're getting married," or whatever. It's like, why are we continuously doing this? It's giving self-hatred. Okay, it's giving a lot of like you just like obsess over the people who oppress us, and I'm just like fully against that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not some crazy revolutionary either. Like I'm not on the other end. It's more of like
you hear that,
I just don't like the idea of us just romanticizing it, because the more we add that to the to the fabric of our culture, the more the story of the atrocities gets like set aside and like put behind us. And I'm really against that whole thing as a concept.
Can I ask you a question then? What like media have you seen that like in your mind correctly or shows a balanced view, right? Because I think that's what you're asking for here. You're not asking for one or the other, but you probably are asking for...
just don't brush it aside. Like, don't glamorize it. Right. Speak to it. I mean, it's tough for me because I stay away from those kind of shows and movies for those reasons. So I don't know too many that really speak about the British Empire in that kind of way, unless they were like war movies or anything like that. So there's not many that come to mind for me. Like I haven't seen The Queen's Gambit, so I don't know if that touches on any of that aspect at all. If it's set in that time period, exactly. But if it's set in that time period and doesn't really touch on it, I don't care. Like I don't care about. I love like British culture too. Like we all do. Like we all watch the Prem. We all like enjoy many aspects of it. It's to me the area that I'm specifically annoyed about is the royalty aspect of it. It's like obsessing over the exact symbols of oppression. That's the issue for me.
Yeah, but like I would say, like I feel like a decent chunk of England probably agrees with you.
Yeah,
they're probably also tired of the same shit too.
Right.
So I don't know. I would love to see the box office numbers of that movie and see the breakdown of how much money it actually makes in England about something like that. Because I don't know if a lot of dudes are flocking there.
I feel like I don't want to say this out loud, but it would probably be a very good punishment for me if I lost a draft to have to review that movie alone. Like honestly.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, look at that.
You'd have to review it like nicely. You'd have to be nice about it.
No. I think like.
What are the positives of this movie, Osama? Segment 1.
Crazy.
I like Malcolm.
Yo.
Malcolm seems like a good dude.
No, I think I agree with most of what Sam like just kind of mentioned. It definitely. So that's why Admir said, Fahad, calm down. Like, he's not a full revolutionary, because me and Sam were both going off on the chat about this. I'm definitely, and that's why I'm for this movie. Like, black and brown people should be seeing movies like these where not nice things are done to you, where it's not like it's difficult to vanilla it up. Like that fucking the issue with that other movie I met. That movie was massive, bro. That movie got nominated for awards, obviously, because dudes are like,
what was it called again?
Yeah, Lagan. A super Amir Khan is in that movie. Like I watched that movie like 5-6 times. I remember as a kid I used to love that movie, but as I grew up, I'm like, bro, that's not how it happens. You can't just win a cricket match and then and their only like immediate like danger was that, oh, they're not giving them enough grain, so they're screwed. Whereas this one is very much existential. Like they're ruthless. Like dudes are saying you're not worth a bullet. Like that's the level of kind of hatred that you're seeing, and I feel like we need to see almost more of that. I obviously didn't watch The Crown. Like Sam, I generally tend to stay away just as a rule from any sort of kind of like. I mean, I love James Bond. Like, it's not an issue with like British people. And
it's
James Bond, I'm sure.
It's not an issue with the culture.
And also, it's not like the MI6 did nice things to the subcontinent either. But the overall, James Bond story doesn't fetishize like colonization or other sorts of weird shit. Whereas, like, you might have, regardless of how many people of color are in Bridgerton, this movie is a really good example. Those same people of color could be in a movie where they are actually the main characters and not just like side roles that can be driven, you know? So I hope like instead of paying for like undertaking these projects that are basically glorified reality shows, we get actually some things like that are based in reality, and that, like Edmund said, that is somewhat balanced. Like it's not an unreasonable thing to ask. I'm not saying show them as like the white devil, but like show at least what like happened. What historically happened. At least show that. That's not a bad ask.
And the proof of that, all that stuff being erased from like the just the cultural fabric, is that we would never highlight. Like we would never we would never obsess over a story about.
Yeah, I know what you're gonna say. Yes,
German royalty or anything, or
Germans,
we would never.
Or like Japanese, like the Chinese aren't doing movies on Japanese royalty. Like they're not doing that. Like that's not happening. You know,
it is.
This is the only version of it that exists. Like we're not watching movies on the Ottomans. We're not watching shows on the Ottomans doing wild shit.
It's exactly what you said, Fahad. Which is, if my issue with it is, if you grow up without knowing that story firsthand because you've never experienced it. If you're a kid right now and you're like growing up with these kind of like, you know, romanticized British stories, it's you're gonna have a really different view of what truly happened. And the British, just like the Americans, have been great at like retelling history through those lenses. It's like, yes, it's fun, it's all for fun, I get it, it's like drama stories, but the more we do that, the more that becomes bigger in our cultural like zeitgeist than actually what happened.
The actual things that happened. That's it.
Right.
That's it.
What's your take, Adam?
Yeah, so it's my turn to defend the British Empire and their colonialism.
I mean, the best part about the cast was, before we started, I was telling Sam, like, thankfully, all of us have been oppressed by the British at one point or another. So no one's gonna be out here. No one's gonna be out there talking about.
It's I've always been turned off because that whole genre of TV never did it for me.
Drama.
It's purely social drama TV, right? And that's the pull of it. But you're absolutely right in highlighting the fact that there's this dark side to it, whereby when you watch like Jersey Shore and, you know, people acting out of pocket, you're not
like
going
genocide.
Yeah,
Chris Christie isn't genociding in the background.
Yeah, obviously, but you're not thinking like of Italians. You're just, these are the characters, and you're not rebuilding your idea of Italian culture in your head based on sort of what you're doing.
Exactly.
Because there's different sort of explorations of Italian culture throughout I guess our entertainment. But even that, like, conversations around Columbus Day are super difficult for a lot of people because of shit like this. Because we see certain cultures through a certain prism, and then that's where everything else derives from. And if it's a big gap between the two things, we tend to just, for dissonance sake, you just don't want to deal with it. So you just dump it into whatever, right? And you move on. And I think that's, you're correctly highlighting it here, is that what your culture, I forgot the word. There's another word that goes with dissonance. I forgot what it is. It's a psych term, whatever the hell it is.
Cognitive.
But
cognitive?
Yeah,
cognitive
yeah.
Dissonance?
There it is, yeah. The cognitive dissonance that you're doing with these TV shows is to like an obscene end. It's to an obscene end. And you're right. The British Empire has the America to thank for just not highlighting a lot of the bullshit that they did. because it's not as recent, or they're not at the forefront of global politics, for example. And so it gets lost. It's typically the U.S. in our generation, and maybe the generations right before us, 2 or 3 before us, that were the ones, in the spotlight, and rightly so. But you're right. What then happens is you can then rewrite for new generations what that culture did. There's actually something really interesting I came across. Just came to mind. Like Jewish people who have survived the Holocaust are soon to not be around anymore just because of age, right? And so we're going to have generations of people who are not going to see real life people who lived through those events, right? And there is a fear that there will be a retelling of what happened in those events, right? Just because time will pass, the way we feel about things will change, and
the way we tell stories,
how we tell those stories. And it's why it's really important for film to put their foot down in a way and take this shit seriously, because these are the artifacts that we can go back to in a way and remind ourselves this is what happened, especially with things that happen. I mean, this is from the 20s, so it's not even hundreds of years ago. But for most of us, I don't know anybody who interacted with the British Empire one-on-one. Like, that's just, I don't know.
1v1 me, bro.
Yeah, I can't hear firsthand accounts, right? Yeah. So the only place for me to get this information is if I sit down and watch a documentary, which...
You're never going to do that. Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. You're going to teach it in school, and it's going to go over my head because I'm in high school and I could give a shit about what you're teaching me. I'm just going to get on with the day. Or you do this. Within entertainment, you tell the story, within the means, obviously, that you can, as true as possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, our ancestors told stories through poems and songs. I mean, we talked about poems for this movie, for example, poems and songs. And that's precedent for the fact that art and literature, these days, movies and shows, have a cultural impact. And to your exact point, Admir, it's they're not exempt from this idea of carrying on the cultural stories that we tell. The vast majority of things that I recall about, the visual imagery I have in my head about history come from movies and shows and stuff like that.
They're a huge proponent of a lot of the ideas. I mean, the film Fahad's talking about, Lagan, so it's a 2001 movie, right? And there's movies from the 80s and 90s that I'm sure you can go back to, tell a very sanitized version of this story. And I think we're just coming to grips, at least in the West, and it's nice to see that it's happening elsewhere, with the fact that, no, reality was far from it. It was very different. I remember, and this is, again, we're just tangent through the wazoo right now, but I remember watching The Help for the first time with what's
I've actually
her
never
name?
seen it.
Emma, is it Emma? Forgot her name.
Watson?
Emma Watson.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Emma Watson. Yeah. No, it's not Emma Watson. I forgot her name. She's from God, super bad. Wow, the names. Chris hates it when I do this. Because she's a really good actor. Emma Stone. Geez, there it is.
Stone.
So Emma Stone is in the movie. And it's a very weird movie when I watched it. Because I watched it at a point in time where I understood the impact of who's the one telling the story. Understanding who's the maker of the story. And the film plays out very weirdly. And it made me uncomfortable to a degree. And I remember at the time, this was critically backed. People loved it. It was really, it got nominated. I think Octavia Spencer got put on the map because of this movie, right? Viola Davis has been on record, who's also in, it's like a loaded cast. She's been on record as saying I'm not going to quote, but it was along the lines of she felt not bad, but she wishes she didn't make that film, right? Because it's one of those movies that sanitizes what actually happened, makes the people who are the perpetrators of the violence or the perpetrators of the injustices feel better about themselves.
Right.
And if you're released, and this is the thing that kind of is odd, I guess, in the Lagan example, because the majority of, you can tell me if I'm wrong, the majority of the audience that the film was meant to serve is not those who oppressed or those who are from the lineage of those who oppressed, which is kind of odd. I can almost understand it in America that it's coming to that because the audience is not, you're not going to necessarily, perhaps you think about it back in the early or late 00s, you're not going to fill a theater by making the most critical film about racism in the 60s, let's say, in the South,
but
right?
Like,
so,
but I will say, like, Sam, you can correct me on this about Egypt. Sometimes, like, some of these colonized countries are, like, caught up in their own web of, like, the shit that has been left behind. Right now, movies like these are being made because nationalists are in charge in India. So Modi's party, they're like ultra right nationalists. So it's all about like, we need to reclaim our history. We should be talking about these things. Whereas a little bit back then, they weren't that anti-British. Where although the British left, they left because dudes were like, we're just not going to eat. Like, they didn't leave because they killed a bunch of them and they decided that, we have to. It was almost like, you guys are never going to eat again if we don't leave? All right, we'll just draw a bunch of random lines and then leave, and then you guys deal with it. So, although like it came out in the 2000s, right now, India is almost going through a different tonal shift that wasn't happening prior. So, I don't know if it's a similar thing in Egypt where almost like colonizer culture is glorified, although there's no like British person in India actually pushing this project, but it's almost like a cultural thing where they're so deep rooted. They've ruled you for so long, you can't break the shackles out of it. Whereas here, obviously, there's an element of you're actually trying to sell it to British people, and a lot of people that are here used to be British people way back when, right? So there's an element of that. Whereas like in our countries, there's no actual direct influence anymore, but culturally it has been left to the point where dudes are still kind of like quaking in their boots to make bad things about the British. Like, I still haven't seen a crazy indictment of a movie from Bangladesh on Britain. I don't know why no one has stepped up to do it, but I'm sure it's cultural thing. People are just
Gets passed down.
Not. My parents have told me to never talk bad about like X, so I'm not just gonna do it, and that's gonna bleed into your professional life. Sam, you can tell me like how it's in Egypt.
It's very similar, like to the point where there is that colonial mindset of certain things were different when, we were occupied by the British, and as a result of that, you get this, you even mentioned it, like, for example, in India, very similar in Egypt too, and all around the world, the notion of racism and colorism as a whole gets passed down to the point where you have still in India, like a common issue of skin whitening and just like social class hierarchy based on your skin tone, whether you're light skin or dark skin, and that's very much passed down through imperialist
that wasn't a concept
oppression.
That existed
before
these dudes pulled up.
It becomes, because it's so ingrained in you over hundreds of years of colonialism, you then attribute that to the positive parts of society. You're like, if you're light skin back in the day, it probably meant you were richer, you were more educated, you were whatever. And it's like all these, and all the stuff that you were looking for. Like, maybe I'm looking for a partner who's more educated, has more money, et cetera, but I'm using the shortcut of their skin color to get to that. It's very hard to move away from that shortcut, and like it gets passed down generation to generation. And that's one thing, like just the skin color. There's so many other aspects of culture that get passed down, even despite the fact that the British Empire had left those countries. And so the same thing happens in Egypt too, where there's glorification of how times were back then because of the fact that, I think Egypt got its independence in 1922. There's no one that's going to be alive. I mean, very few people are going to be alive now that have had experienced that. And so it's more of like, Egypt is shit now because of XYZ reasons. I'm sure it was better before. Like, we might as well still be run by the British if it's so shit right now. And that's like a common thought amongst a lot of people all around the world. And it is purely a thought that's left behind as ramifications of that imperialism. It wouldn't happen that way if that wasn't so ingrained into everything that we did, and because the British were so unilaterally existent across the globe. If this was like a one-off imperialistic nation, like you don't even feel the same way when it comes to the Dutch, for example. Like, even though they've colonialized so many countries in Africa, for instance, it doesn't feel the same because the British have literally at one point occupied the vast majority of the globe. And so
of the known world, the sun never goes down, baby. I love how they put that in there too.
Yeah.
Because that's a thing, like some cornball dudes British dudes actually like to say that OD back then to like dudes' faces. Clearly, dudes who don't even know what you're saying, and you're speaking English to them on the British Empire. Like they would love to say that. Really, you're gonna oppress millions of people just so you can get to say that.
But it's exactly the point you both are making, which is, that the ideologies stay behind because they're passed down, even though the physical aspects of imperialism no longer exist. It's still very hard to change habits. Like if we as a society have habits right now that we all collectively agree to, if all of a sudden next decade the country goes, we're going to stop doing this one thing, it doesn't just immediately stop happening. Even though we eradicate something, it's going to continue to exist in multiple different forms. A major one of which is art. Like art is going to be heavily influenced by that, especially when you have this colonial mindset of we're coming through with superior art forms that we have to bestow upon you because you are barbaric, you are lesser than, you are inferior. You need to adopt these superior forms of art. We think about it in everything that we do in society nowadays. It's like, because of cultural relativism, it's very hard for us to put ourselves in the shoes of other nations, not through the lens of British like rose-tinted glasses. It's like I look at things as a natural person like everybody else. I go, oh, that's kind of weird that those people do that over there in that country, or it's kind of like weird. And why is it weird? It's only because I've been passed down something through American culture, which has been a byproduct of British culture, etc. And so, but because British culture is so unilateral, it becomes these things that we know as like universal rules, when in reality, they aren't actually universal rules. They were rules passed down by a universal entity that is no longer there universally, but has still left its marks.
Yeah, I'm happy in a way that we're at a place in history where sort of we have the ability to push back on that stuff. Like, even though it is happening around us still, you can see it, and I think you can push back against it, which was probably not always the case, or at least it was a super small minority, I would say. And there was consequences for doing said stuff. No one's gonna, I think, bat an eye to what we have to say in a good way. I mean, like, to what we have to say about these TV shows. It's interesting, and it's I think the thing that's lost is also the pluralism that's available to the world when you do this. When you view things through the one lens that you've been presented with, it's hard to like blame people who don't know what they don't know in a way, right? Because when you're constantly seeing the one thing, it's like, yeah, that's all you know. The only thing that sort of separates us is our experiences, sort of where we come from, and maybe the people we've interacted with. But that in a way is also down to a little bit of chance, a little bit of luck. And yeah, maybe we seek it out now, but I didn't seek out like this stuff when I was like 15, 16. Like, I know damn well, what my mindset was back then, and it was not what it is today, and nor should it have been. But that's why entertainment is so important, for it to get it right. And if you are going to go down this route of like, you're going to dramatize it and wash it, that cannot be the majority perspective. Like, that cannot be the only thing, or at least what seems to be the only thing available. Like, if it was a point where the majority of the entertainment was true to what happened, and then you have this niche thing where it's like, let's just get this and fantasize what happened, we wouldn't have a problem with it. But the problem becomes when that's the majority perspective and that's the majority story told, and these people are shown as tea and crumpets type of shit, or it's like, wow, they're so class, and we still have that. Like, we make jokes and shit about that, pinkies up and all this and all that crap. Like, it runs down from that idea of still seeing these other cultures as, the French are so high class and the British are so high class and all this and all that. And it runs from that. It runs from the entertainment that we get. And it's good to see pushback and a better telling of actual events, man. It really is. Especially, again, I know nothing, like very, very broad strokes of what happened, right? So it's really important that when the few pieces of entertainment that you do see have something there that's really grounded in reality. Because otherwise, yeah, it's like you go, oh yeah, there seemed to have been some miscommunication for hundreds of years. And then, they sat down, they played the game of cricket, and it was sorted over tea. Like, yeah, okay, you leave, all right, cool. And that's unfortunately what it ends up becoming. That's sort of the ongoing battle I think we have in trying to tell different stories and get different people to tell different stories in entertainment. And it's not just purely to check off a box, but it's because of this. It's to give you and us and everybody who watches like a fuller understanding of the world around us and the history, that fed us to this moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I need to make one correction.
Yeah.
On
Go ahead. Yeah.
what I said earlier, which is 1922 is when Egypt became sovereign from the British. They weren't fully independent and rid of
like
culture until
like
1952, 56-ish, somewhere around there.
A little bit different. A little bit different.
But
that's part of it. Like that's exactly what sort of we're referring to is like these smudgy dates matter. Like it's 30 years, it's 40 years. It's a generation of people that may or may not have been.
That we're sitting in the sidelines. Wait, are we free or not, man?
and that also had to fight like 2 world wars that they had no business being in. That no one was trying to fight Egypt, but dudes are being sent to war just to go like, yo.
How convenient. How convenient, bro. You can have your independence now.
No, but that's one of the ironic parts about like World War II. If World War II doesn't happen, neither of our countries is free right now. Like, then we don't have the leverage to tell them, like, yo, you just made us fight twice. Like, you're OD, you got to let us go because this is not working out. Like, they never leave. And that's the thing. It's just that it just gets lost in the conversation. But even in this movie is super progressive, at least, the way it portrays it. But even Jenny staying, no white woman was staying for a brown dude out of like a colony situation back then, dog. That's never, that's still like out of left field. That's still out of left field.
That relationship was just, I was just looking at it, I'm like, I don't understand.
I just saw it as like humor. I'm like, oh, it's funny. Like they don't understand each other. It's kind of cute. But generally, as long as like this party is in charge in India, they'll like push this sort of kind of media for the near future. So we'll keep getting these films as much as possible.